Captain Emma Blake stepped onto the alien ship for the first time, her boots making soft clicks against the strange metal floor. The walls around her glowed with a pale blue light that seemed to come from within the material itself. She had seen pictures of alien vessels before, but being inside one felt completely different. "Welcome aboard the Star Whisper, Captain Blake," said Commander Vex, the tall alien who led her down the corridor. His skin was gray and smooth, and his large eyes reminded Emma of deep pools of water. "We are honored to have a human captain visit our ship." Emma smiled and nodded. This was her first diplomatic mission as captain of the Terran Voyager, and she wanted everything to go perfectly. Earth had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years, and humans were still considered newcomers by most alien species. They walked through several corridors lined with doors and strange symbols that Emma could not read. Other aliens passed by, some nodding politely at her. She noticed they all wore similar uniforms made of a fabric that seemed to shimmer slightly in the ship's light. "Your ship is beautiful," Emma said, trying to make conversation. "Thank you," Commander Vex replied. "It has served our people well for many cycles. We built it using designs that have been passed down for generations." They reached a large room that Emma guessed was the dining hall. Round tables were scattered throughout the space, each surrounded by chairs that looked comfortable despite their unusual shape. The ceiling was high and curved, giving the room an open feeling. "This is where we share our meals and discuss important matters," Commander Vex explained. "Tonight, you will join us at our main table for the welcoming feast." Emma looked toward the table he pointed to near the center of the room. It was larger than the others and had 7 chairs around it. But something struck her as odd. One of the chairs was pushed back slightly from the table, and no place setting had been put in front of it. "Is someone running late?" Emma asked, pointing to the empty chair. Commander Vex followed her gaze and his expression changed. His large eyes seemed to grow even more serious, and he was quiet for a moment. "That chair," he said slowly, "is not for anyone who will join us tonight." "Oh," Emma said, feeling confused. "Is it broken?" "No, Captain Blake. It is not broken." Commander Vex looked around the room as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "It is a tradition. An old tradition that all ships follow." Emma wanted to ask more questions, but something in the alien's tone told her this was not the right time. She nodded and followed him to the other chairs. During the meal, Emma tried to focus on the conversation and the strange but delicious food. But her eyes kept drifting back to that empty chair. She noticed that whenever other aliens looked at it, their expressions became respectful and quiet, almost sad. The next day, Emma visited 2 more alien ships. The first belonged to a species called the Helix, who had green skin and moved very gracefully. Their dining room was completely different from the previous ship, with low tables and cushions instead of chairs. But there, in the place of honor, was an empty cushion with no food placed before it. The second ship belonged to the Crystal Folk, who were tall and thin with skin that looked like it was made of tiny diamonds. Their dining area was a beautiful room with tables carved from single pieces of white stone. And there, at their main table, was an empty chair made of the same white stone, polished and clean but clearly not meant for any guest. "This is very strange," Emma said to her first officer, Lieutenant Johnson, when she returned to her own ship that evening. "What's strange, Captain?" Johnson asked. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who had served in space for 20 years. "Every alien ship I visited today had an empty seat at their main dining table. When I asked about it, they all got quiet and said it was tradition. But no one would explain what the tradition means." Johnson scratched his chin thoughtfully. "You know, Captain, now that you mention it, I remember seeing the same thing on other ships during my career. I always assumed it was just how they arranged their furniture." "But it's not random," Emma insisted. "The chair is always in a place of honor. And everyone treats it with respect. There's something important about it, something I'm missing." That night, Emma lay in her bunk thinking about the empty chairs. As someone who had studied ancient cultures back on Earth, she knew that traditions usually had deep meanings. Empty seats in many human cultures were ways to honor the dead or remember someone important who could not be present. But why would every alien species in the galaxy have the same tradition? And why did they all seem reluctant to talk about it? The next morning brought a message from Admiral Roberts, Emma's commanding officer back on Earth. His face appeared on her communication screen, looking serious. "Captain Blake, I hope your diplomatic mission is going well," he said. "I'm calling because I received reports that you've been asking questions about certain traditions on alien ships." Emma sat up straighter. "Yes, sir. I noticed that every ship keeps an empty chair at their main table, and I was curious about the meaning." Admiral Roberts was quiet for a long moment. His weathered face looked tired, as if he was remembering something from long ago. "Captain," he said finally, "there are some traditions in space that are universal. This is one of them. From now on, the Terran Voyager will also keep an empty chair at our main table during all formal meals." "But why, sir?" Emma asked. "What does it mean?" "It's an old tradition, Captain. Very old. Every spacefaring civilization honors it, and now we must too." The Admiral's voice was firm but gentle. "Don't ask the aliens about it anymore. Just respect it." The communication ended, leaving Emma with more questions than answers. Captain Emma Blake could not stop thinking about the empty chair. For 3 weeks now, her ship had been traveling toward the Outer Rim territories, and every day she found herself staring at the vacant seat they had placed at their own main table. The crew followed orders without question, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes too. Emma decided she needed to learn more. She started by visiting the ship's library database, searching through thousands of records about alien cultures and space traditions. She read about greeting ceremonies, trade customs, and religious practices from dozens of different species. But nowhere could she find any mention of empty chairs or vacant seats at dining tables. Next, she tried interviewing crew members who had served on other ships. Lieutenant Martinez from the navigation team had worked on a cargo vessel that regularly traded with alien worlds. "Did you ever notice empty chairs on alien ships?" Emma asked him during their conversation in her ready room. Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, Captain, now that you mention it, yes. But I was told not to ask about it. My old captain said some things in space are better left alone." "But didn't you wonder why?" Emma pressed. "Of course I wondered," Martinez replied. "But wondering and asking are different things. In space, you learn to respect what you don't understand." Emma tried asking other crew members, but their answers were similar. Everyone had noticed the tradition, but no one had ever gotten a clear explanation for it. Frustrated, Emma decided to reach out beyond her own ship. She sent messages to old friends from the Space Academy who now served on different vessels throughout the galaxy. She contacted researchers at the University of Earth who studied alien cultures. She even tried reaching xenoanthropologists on distant space stations. The responses she received were all disappointingly similar. People either claimed they had never noticed the tradition, or they said they knew about it but had never learned its meaning. A few people warned her to stop asking questions. Dr. Sarah Wilson, her former professor, sent a particularly troubling message: "Emma, some subjects are sensitive in galactic politics. Whatever you're investigating, be careful. Not everything is meant to be understood by everyone." 1 month into their journey, Emma was eating dinner alone in her quarters when she heard a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Chief Engineer Thompson standing in the hallway. He was a big man with gray hair and rough hands who had worked on starships for most of his adult life. "Captain, may I come in?" he asked quietly. "Of course, Chief. What can I do for you?" Thompson stepped inside and looked around nervously. "I heard you've been asking questions about the empty chair tradition." Emma's heart jumped. Finally, someone who might have answers. "Yes, I have. Do you know something about it?" "Maybe," Thompson said. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her small dining table. "But this isn't something we should talk about in the corridors or in front of the crew." "Why all the secrecy, Chief?" Thompson was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Because some stories are too big for most people to handle. Some truths change the way you see everything." Emma leaned forward. "Tell me." "First, you have to promise me something," Thompson said. "If I tell you what I know, you can't go around asking more questions to other people. This isn't the kind of knowledge you should spread carelessly." "I promise," Emma said, though part of her wondered what she was agreeing to. Thompson took a deep breath. 30 years ago, I was a young engineer on a deep space exploration vessel called the Pioneer. We were mapping new star systems in the far reaches of the galaxy. During that mission, we made contact with a very old alien who was living alone on a small planet." "What kind of alien?" Emma asked. "Unlike any species we had ever seen before. He was tall and thin, with skin that looked almost transparent. His eyes were ancient, like he had seen more years than should be possible. He spoke our language perfectly, which was strange because no human had ever been to that part of space before." Thompson paused and rubbed his forehead. "The alien invited our captain and senior officers to dinner. And there, at his table, was an empty chair. When our captain asked about it, the old alien smiled sadly." "What did he say?" He said the chair was for his people. All of his people. He told us that long ago, his species had traveled throughout the galaxy, visiting young civilizations and helping them learn to travel between the stars. They shared their knowledge freely and helped many species avoid terrible mistakes. Emma felt chills running down her spine. What happened to them? The old alien told us that his people had made a choice. They decided that the galaxy would be better if the younger species learned to work together without depending on teachers. So they left. They scattered themselves across space, giving up their own civilization so that others could grow. Thompson's voice became very quiet. He said that every species they had helped honors them by keeping an empty place at their table. It's a way of remembering that we are all connected, that we all learn from the same teachers. Where are these teachers now? Emma asked. Gone, Thompson said. Maybe dead, maybe still wandering alone in distant parts of space. The old alien we met was one of the last. He said he stayed behind to make sure their story wasn't completely forgotten. Emma sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Why don't more people know this story? Because most people aren't ready for it, Thompson replied. Think about it, Captain. Every major technology that allows us to travel in space, every system that lets different species communicate, every principle that keeps peace between worlds, it all came from these ancient teachers. We like to think we earned our place among the stars, but really, we were given it as a gift. The room was silent for several minutes. Finally, Emma asked, Do you think they're really all gone? Thompson stood up to leave. I don't know, Captain. But every time I see that empty chair, I hope that somewhere in the galaxy, they know we remember them. Chief Engineer Thompson looked around Emma's quarters one more time, making sure they were truly alone. He sat back down and continued his story in a voice so quiet that Emma had to lean forward to hear him. The old alien on that distant planet told us more than I mentioned before, Thompson said. He shared details about his people that I've never told anyone else. He called them the Wanderers, and he said they were the first species in our galaxy to master travel between the stars. Emma listened carefully as Thompson described what he had learned 30 years ago. The Wanderers had developed their space travel technology over 1,000,000 years before humans even existed on Earth. But unlike most advanced civilizations, they did not use their power to conquer other worlds or build vast empires. The old alien showed us pictures, Thompson continued. Images stored in a crystal device that projected them into the air like magic. We saw the Wanderers' ships visiting hundreds of different planets. They looked for worlds where intelligent life was just beginning to reach for space. According to the old alien, the Wanderers had a simple but powerful belief. They thought that every thinking species in the universe was precious and worth protecting. They saw intelligence as something rare and wonderful that should be helped to grow and flourish. He told us that the Wanderers spent thousands of years traveling from world to world, Thompson said. Whenever they found a species that had just invented basic space flight, they would make contact. But they were very careful about how they did it. The Wanderers never appeared as gods or demanded to be worshipped. Instead, they came as friends and teachers. They would study each species carefully, learning about their culture and their way of thinking. Then they would offer help in ways that each species could understand and accept. For example, Thompson explained, when they first met the Crystal Folk, they appeared as beings made of living light. The Crystal Folk worshipped light as sacred, so this form felt natural to them. When they met the Helix people, who valued grace and movement, the Wanderers appeared as dancers who moved through space like flowing water. To humans, when the Wanderers had first made contact centuries ago, they had appeared as wise travelers who shared stories and knowledge around campfires. Each species remembered the Wanderers differently, but all remembered them as patient teachers who never forced their ideas on others. The gifts the Wanderers gave were not just technology, but ways of thinking. They taught young civilizations how to solve problems without violence. They shared methods for different species to communicate even when they thought in completely different ways. Most importantly, they taught the principles that would later become the foundation of peaceful space travel. The old alien explained that jump drive technology, the thing that lets our ships travel faster than light, came from Wanderer science, Thompson said. But they didn't just hand over the complete blueprints. They gave each species pieces of the puzzle and let them figure out how to put it together themselves. This method meant that every species felt proud of their achievements while still benefiting from ancient wisdom. The translation devices that allowed different aliens to understand each other were based on Wanderer linguistics. The navigation systems that kept ships from getting lost in space used star maps the Wanderers had created over millions of years. Even the basic design of most starships followed patterns the Wanderers had established. The reason alien ships looked so similar despite coming from different worlds was that they were all built using the same fundamental principles. But the most important gift, Thompson continued, was not any piece of technology. It was a set of ideas about how different species should treat each other. The Wanderers had created what they called the Great Understanding. This was not a written law or formal treaty, but a shared way of thinking that they taught to every species they helped. The Great Understanding said that all intelligent life was connected, that helping others made everyone stronger, and that knowledge should be shared freely rather than hoarded. According to the old alien, every major principle of galactic civilization came from these teachings, Thompson said. The idea that first contact should be peaceful, the tradition of sharing scientific discoveries, the belief that trade should benefit both sides, all of this started with the Wanderers. Emma interrupted with a question. If they were so wise and powerful, why did they disappear? Thompson smiled sadly. That's the most remarkable part of the story. The old alien told us that the Wanderers made a deliberate choice. They realized that as long as they remained as teachers, the younger species would always depend on them. The galaxy would never truly grow up. The Wanderers spent many years debating this problem among themselves. They had watched civilizations rise and fall across millions of years, and they noticed a pattern. Species that were given too much help often became weak and dependent. Species that had to struggle and learn on their own became stronger and more creative. So they made perhaps the greatest sacrifice in galactic history, Thompson said. They decided to give up their own civilization so that their students could become truly independent. The process took several generations. The Wanderers gradually stopped making new contact with species and began withdrawing from the ones they already knew. They shared their final gifts of knowledge and technology, then slowly faded away from galactic society. The old alien said it was like parents watching their children grow up, Thompson explained. At some point, the parents have to step back and let the children make their own decisions, even if those decisions might lead to mistakes. Before they left, the Wanderers made sure that all the species they had helped understood their connection to each other. They explained that every civilization in space was part of one great family, all taught by the same ancient teachers. That's why the empty chair exists, Thompson concluded. It's not just a memorial for the Wanderers. It's a reminder that we are all brothers and sisters in space, all sharing the same inherited wisdom. Every time we sit down to eat, we remember that we are not alone in the universe. Emma sat quietly for several minutes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had learned. Finally, she asked, "Do you think they're still out there somewhere?" Thompson stood up to leave. The old alien believed they scattered themselves across the galaxy, each one choosing a different path. Some might still be alive, watching from a distance. Others might have died long ago. But in a way, they never really left. Every time we make a peaceful first contact or share knowledge with another species, we are carrying on their work. Emma spent the next few days thinking about everything Thompson had told her. The story of the Wanderers seemed almost too incredible to believe, but it explained so many things she had noticed during her travels. Still, she needed to know more. There had to be official records somewhere, some proof that this ancient civilization had really existed. Late one night, Emma sat alone in her quarters accessing the ship's computer systems. She searched through databases she had never explored before, looking for any mention of the Wanderers or their disappearance. Most of her searches came up empty, but after hours of looking, she found something interesting. Deep in the historical archives was a reference to something called the Great Silence. It was mentioned in several old reports from different alien species, all dating to roughly the same time period about 800 years ago. The reports were brief and seemed incomplete, as if important information had been removed. Emma printed out everything she could find and spread the documents across her desk. One report from the Crystal Folk mentioned the day the teachers stopped calling. Another from the Helix people talked about the time when the Wise Ones said goodbye forever. A third document, written in an ancient human dialect, referred to the departure of the first travelers. All of these reports mentioned the same approximate date, a period about 8 centuries ago when something significant had happened across the galaxy. But none of them explained exactly what had occurred. Emma decided to send a coded message to Dr. Helen Foster, a friend from her academy days who now worked as a researcher at the Galactic Historical Institute on Mars. If anyone had access to complete records about ancient galactic events, it would be Helen. The reply came 3 days later. Helen's message was short and cryptic. "Emma, what you're asking about is classified at the highest levels. I can't discuss it over normal communications. But if you're really determined to learn the truth, look for Archive Section 7 Alpha in the Terran Central Library when you return to Earth. You'll need Admiral-level clearance to access it. Emma stared at the message. Why would information about ancient history be classified? What was the government hiding about the Wanderers? She spent the next week trying to find other sources of information. She contacted historians on different worlds, sent messages to archaeological teams, and even tried reaching out to some of the older alien species who might remember stories from 800 years ago. Most of her inquiries were ignored or deflected. But finally, she received an unexpected response from Commander Vex, the alien captain whose ship she had visited months earlier. His message was brief but urgent. Captain Blake, stop asking questions about the Ancient Ones. Some knowledge is dangerous. Meet me at Station Omega 7 when your mission ends. Come alone. Emma's ship arrived at Station Omega 7 2 weeks later. It was a small trading post in neutral space, used mainly by merchants and travelers who wanted to avoid the main shipping lanes. Emma told her crew she needed to handle some diplomatic business and took a shuttle to the station alone. Commander Vex was waiting for her in a quiet bar on the station's lower level. His large eyes looked worried, and he kept glancing around as if checking for unwanted listeners. Captain Blake, he said quietly after she sat down, you have been asking dangerous questions. Dangerous to whom? Emma asked. I just want to understand the truth about the Wanderers. The truth, Vex said slowly, is more complicated than the stories you have heard. He ordered drinks for both of them, then continued speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. 800 years ago, my people received a message. All of the spacefaring species received the same message at exactly the same time. It came from every communication device simultaneously, ship radios, planetary broadcast systems, even personal communication devices. Emma leaned closer. What did the message say? It was from the Wanderers, Vex explained. They told us that they were leaving forever. But it was not just a simple goodbye. The message contained something else, complete star charts showing the location of their home system. According to Vex, the message had caused panic across the galaxy. For centuries, no one had known where the Wanderers actually came from. They appeared when they wanted to and disappeared just as mysteriously. Suddenly, they had revealed their most closely guarded secret. Many species sent ships to investigate, Vex continued. My own people were among the first to reach the Wanderer home system. What we found there was disturbing. The Wanderer system contained 12 planets orbiting an old yellow star. 3 of the planets showed clear signs of having once supported massive civilizations, cities, spaceports, industrial complexes that could have housed billions of beings. But everything was completely empty. It was not like the ruins you find on dead worlds, Vex explained. There were no bodies, no signs of war or disaster, no indication that anyone had died. It was as if an entire civilization had simply decided to pack up and leave, taking everything with them. The investigating teams had found empty buildings that were perfectly preserved but completely vacant. Computer systems had been wiped clean. Even personal belongings had been removed. The only things left behind were the massive structures themselves, buildings, roads, and monuments that were too large to move. But the strangest discovery, Vex said, was in the central city on their main planet. There was a huge building that seemed to be some kind of meeting hall or government center. Inside, we found a single room with chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Emma felt chills running down her spine. How many chairs? Thousands, Vex replied. Each one was different, clearly designed for a different species. And every single chair was empty except for one in the center of the circle. On that central chair, the investigators had found a small crystal device. When they activated it, the device projected a holographic message that repeated in every known language in the galaxy. What did it say? Emma asked. Vex was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with an emotion Emma had never heard from him before, something like sadness mixed with awe. The message was simple, he said. It told us that the Wanderers had completed their work. They had taught the galaxy's children everything they needed to know. Now it was time for the children to grow up and make their own way among the stars. The message had explained that the Wanderers were scattering themselves across the universe, each choosing a different path into the unknown. Some would continue exploring distant galaxies. Others would seek new forms of existence beyond physical form. A few might remain hidden in remote parts of space, watching from a distance as their former students built their own civilizations. The message ended with a request, Vex concluded. They asked us to remember them not as gods or teachers, but as the first family in a galaxy that would now be home to many families. They asked us to save them a place at our tables, because although they were leaving, they would always be part of what we had become. Emma sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. So the empty chair is exactly what you think it is, Vex finished. A promise that we will never forget where we came from, and a hope that someday, somehow, the family might be together again. Emma returned to her ship with a heavy heart and a mind full of new understanding. Everything she had learned from Thompson and Commander Vex swirled through her thoughts as she walked through the familiar corridors of the Terran Voyager. The crew greeted her with their usual respect, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes. They wanted to know what she had discovered during her secret meeting. That evening, Emma stood in the ship's main dining hall, staring at the empty chair that had puzzled her for so many months. Now she understood why conversations grew quiet whenever people looked at it. Now she knew why even the toughest spaces treated it with such reverence. The chair was not just empty furniture. It was a memorial to the greatest act of love in galactic history. The Wanderers had given up everything they had built over millions of years so that their students could learn to stand on their own. They had sacrificed their entire civilization to give other species the chance to grow and flourish. Emma thought about her own world, Earth, and how humans had struggled to reach the stars. She had always been proud of humanity's achievements in space travel and technology. But now she realized that every major breakthrough had been built on knowledge the Wanderers had left behind. The jump drives, the communication systems, even the basic principles of peaceful first contact. All of it traced back to those ancient teachers. Lieutenant Johnson approached her quietly. "Captain, you've been standing here for a long time. Is everything all right?" Emma turned to her first officer with tears in her eyes. "Johnson, do you ever think about how lucky we are to be out here among the stars?" "Every day, Captain," he replied. "Space is dangerous and lonely, but it's also full of wonders we never could have imagined back on Earth." "That's just it," Emma said. "We didn't earn this by ourselves. Everything we have, everything that makes galactic civilization possible, was given to us by people we never even met." She told Johnson what she had learned about the Wanderers. She explained how they had visited Earth centuries ago, sharing knowledge and wisdom with early human space explorers. She described their philosophy of nurturing young civilizations and their ultimate sacrifice of disappearing so their students could become independent. Johnson listened in amazement. When Emma finished her story, he was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he had heard. "So every species in the galaxy is connected through these ancient teachers?" he finally asked. "That's right," Emma replied. "Every time we share technology with another species, every time we solve a problem through cooperation instead of war, every time we welcome a new civilization into the galactic community, we're following the example the Wanderers set for us." Over the following days, Emma found herself looking at everything differently. When she received reports about trade negotiations between human colonies and alien worlds, she saw the Wanderers' influence in the peaceful protocols being followed. When she watched her crew working alongside alien technicians to repair a damaged communications array, she recognized the spirit of cooperation the ancient teachers had fostered. The most profound change came during the ship's next formal dinner. As was now their custom, the crew gathered around the main table with its empty chair. But this time, instead of simply eating in respectful silence, Emma decided to share what she had learned. "I want to tell you all a story," she began, looking around at the faces of her diverse crew. There were humans from different Earth colonies, but also several aliens who had joined Starfleet over the years. "It's a story about why we keep this chair empty." Emma told them about the Wanderers, speaking in simple words that everyone could understand. She explained how these ancient beings had traveled the galaxy for thousands of years, helping young civilizations learn to reach for the stars. She described their philosophy of treating all intelligent life as precious and worth protecting. "They taught us that we are not separate species competing for resources," Emma said. "We are all part of one great family, sharing the same inherited wisdom and the same responsibility to help each other grow." When she finished the story, the dining hall was completely silent. Then, slowly, one of the alien crew members stood up. It was Ensign Carla, a young officer from the Helix people. "Captain," Carla said in her musical voice, "my grandmother used to tell me stories about the first dancers. That's what my people called the ancient teachers who showed us how to move gracefully between the stars. I never knew that other species had similar stories." "My people called them the light bringers," added Lieutenant Zara, whose crystal-like skin shimmered in the dining hall's soft illumination. "They taught us that knowledge grows brighter when it is shared." One by one, other crew members shared fragments of stories they had heard from their elders. Each species had different names for the Wanderers and remembered them in different ways, but the core message was always the same. Ancient teachers had helped them all reach the stars, then stepped back to let them find their own way. Emma realized that the empty chair represented something even more profound than she had initially understood. It was not just a memorial to the past, but a promise about the future. Every meal shared around that table, every decision made in the spirit of cooperation, every act of kindness between different species was a way of honoring the Wanderer's legacy. They may be gone, Emma said, but they live on in every choice we make. When we choose cooperation over conflict, when we share knowledge instead of hoarding it, when we welcome strangers as friends, we are keeping their spirit alive. As the crew finished their meal and began to leave the dining hall, Emma remained seated, looking at the empty chair one last time. She thought about the wanderers scattered across the vast universe, each following their own path into the unknown. She wondered if any of them were still alive somewhere, watching from a distance as their former students built new civilizations and explored new frontiers. The chair would always be empty in the physical sense. But Emma now understood that it was also eternally full, filled with the love, wisdom, and sacrifice of those who had made all of galactic civilization possible. The Wanderers had achieved true immortality not by clinging to power, but by giving it away. They lived on in every ship that sailed peacefully between the stars, in every friendship formed across species lines, and in every empty chair that reminded the galaxy of its shared heritage. As Emma finally stood to leave, she whispered softly to the empty chair, "Thank you for teaching us to dance among the stars."